there, and welcome to the How to Market Your Horse Business podcast. I'm so glad you're joining me here today. Now, just in case we're new friends, I'm going to jump into a very quick intro and introduce myself so you can know who's here talking to you. And then we're going to dive into today's podcast episode and introduce you to the guest. As you've likely guessed by now, my name is Denise Alvarez. I get to host you here on the How to Market Your Horse Business podcast. And through my business, Storm Lily Marketing, I get to help dream-chasing horse business owners like yourself to see clearly through the marketing overwhelm so you can create a cohesive plan and clear messaging for your social media, your website, your email marketing that's going to help you to turn your online audience into your customers. Now, specifically, I get to do that through one-on-one coaching, website design, and website copywriting, and then education such as this podcast, and I have some online learning resources for you as well. My heart through all of the things that I do here at Storm Lily Marketing is to help you be out in the barn or the arena, behind the photo lens or the camera lens, whatever it is you're doing in the horse world. I want to help you do more of those things. And so here on the podcast specifically, you can always expect a mix of step-by-step strategies, essential how-tos, and entrepreneurial mindset shifts that will help you not only see what's possible for your horse business, but I'm also here to guide you through that process so you can make it happen. Now, today on the podcast specifically, we're diving into some entrepreneurial mindset shifts that I'm really excited for you to do. All right. Now, I'm super pumped because today's guest is going to guide us through some of these based on the experiences that she's had and clients that she has helped as a consultant in the equestrian industry. Now, you've likely heard me say how important it is that you treat your horse business like a business and not like a hobby. Now, the reason is that so many horse business owners and people in the equestrian industry, including myself, entered this world because of our love for horses, right? It's the driver and you enjoy what you do. But in order to do that, you need to make money, right? And so somewhere along the way, many horse business owners forget that if you want to do this thing that you love for the long term, then you need to build a sustainable business and it needs to be treated like a business. Now, that does not mean I'm telling you, hey, you need to build up a large team or you need to scale your business in a certain way that doesn't fit with you, your priorities, your family. Of course not. But if you want to build a team and you want to scale your business, I'm all for that. You know that success is very personal to you, and I want to cheer you on. But whether you intend to stay a one-person shop or solopreneur, or you're on a growth path for your horse business that means scaling and doing things on a larger scale, either way, there's something that you need to do. And that is to embrace your role as a CEO in your business. Now, this is actually really fun for me to say because if you listened to episode 109, then you heard a little bit of me sharing my backstory. And if you haven't yet, you can go to stormlily.com/109 at any time. The number is 109, and it is called Side Hustle to Full-Time, 3 Essentials for Your Marketing Tack Room. And I shared a bit about my story and some lessons learned about marketing for you to apply in your business. But in that episode, I also shared that when I was in high school, if you had asked me what I wanted to do, I would have told you I want to be a CEO. I didn't have a super clear picture of where that would be or what that would look like, but that was my end goal. And so when I entered college, that's actually how I selected marketing as my major. Was I needed a path to get me to CEO because I knew I couldn't just graduate and do it right off the bat. And so now what's so fun is that I get to say, I am a CEO. I'm a CEO of my own business, and it's actually so much better than I ever imagined it could be and what was possible when I graduated high school. Now, for you guys, you may say, Denise, I had no desire to do this, and now I own a business and I wasn't really well equipped for it. I'm not really ready to embrace that role. I'm so glad you're here because Kelly's going to talk to you about some specific things you can do and why it matters so much. And then for those of you who are saying, absolutely, I'm all in, this is for you too. Because either way, we know that being a CEO of your equestrian business does not mean it's all rainbows and roses. And CEO is one of the many hats that you are wearing. And I understand that. At the same time, there are some specific things that only you can do as a CEO of your business. And Kelly is going to share that with you today. Now, as always, you're going to hear about Kelly's backstory, and then she's also going to share what is this idea of being a CEO? What does it really mean to be the visionary for your business? And she's going to give you some very practical ways that you can do that. Again, regardless of the size of your business now or the direction you are headed in terms of growth. All right. All right, friends, let's dive in. Here is my conversation with Kelly Giordano. All right, Kelly, thank you so much for joining me here on the podcast. I truly am grateful for your gift of time today.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Yes, this will be so fun. So before we get into the meat, is what I call it, like the really practical, actionable stuff, I also want to give my audience a turn to learn a little bit more about you, your background, your heart behind business, and how you got to where you are today, because we all have a story. So tell us a little bit about your story and how you became what you're doing now, which is a business coach and consultant specifically for equestrian entrepreneurs.
Yeah. So I started riding when I was 6. My stepmom took me for my first lesson. And as most horse girls, the rest is history, right? I just became obsessed. So I grew up riding in New Jersey at a pretty low level but competitive barn. And we got to do everything, like hands on to the max. It was awesome. Pretty sure I was responsible for like turning out 12 horses at once. And I would just walk them all out. And I was young, so it wouldn't happen now, but we really had a ball. And I continued riding through college. I was fortunate enough to be on the Penn State equestrian team, which was so much fun. And then I graduated and opted to go into the business world. I really didn't see a place for me in the horse world. I think around that time, about 15 years ago, the options were to be a rider or a trainer or to have your own barn. And that was just not for me. So I moved to New York City and I started my career at IBM, which was incredible. I got access to some of the smartest people in the world on some of the coolest projects. I got to travel the world at a really young age, going to the Philippines, Taiwan, Dubai, and then also places like Topeka in the US. But it was very cool, at 23, 24 to be able to do that and experience the world in that way, experience how people work, and then also see some of the best companies in the world like PepsiCo. Working internally for IBM. I worked for the University of Texas at Austin. So I got to do some really cool stuff. Ultimately, it was not my passion. Technology can only be so sexy. And so I wanted to go do some other things and pursue what I thought was my interest in fashion. So I worked for a plus size clothing company for a couple of years doing strategy and operations. And that was really cool because it was kind of like an internal consulting role. We had 8 brands within the portfolio. And so I had to figure out how to treat the brands the same, but also really different, and ultimately led our manufacturing and design process. So everything from concept to customer, I mapped out, I think it was 120 steps along the way and what we needed to do for that. So super cool. Turns out fashion was not my passion. So then I was like, okay, I need something new. And I went to work at a e-commerce startup where we developed websites for e-commerce businesses. Worked for some really great brands there as well, like Pat McGrath Makeup, Faherty, which is a clothing brand, and a couple of shoe brands as well. And my role was to listen to the clients and hear what they wanted and what they were dreaming up, and then work with our design and development teams to make that happen. And all that happened on Shopify, which is the best platform in the world, if you ask me. I'm obsessed with it. It is where you should be selling your stuff. And that was just a lot of fun. COVID hit. So we all kind of took inventory of what was important in our lives. And around the same time, I got back into riding. My kind and generous husband bought me riding lessons, having no idea what he was getting himself into. And at the same time, a friend who does equestrian strength training or strength training for equestrians needed some help marketing her business. And I jumped in and helped her come up with a marketing plan, reaching out to publications, creating this database of who we were reaching out to and influencers. And it took all of my business skills, project management, ideation, strategy, in an environment that I was really interested in, which is horses and strength and fitness. And I asked her, I was like, do you think more people need something like this? And the answer was a resounding yes. And that is when the idea of Avenue Equestrian was started. I did a little beta testing. So I worked for free for some people while I still had my full time job. And then in January of 2021, I took the leap and quit and became full time in the equestrian industry, creating Avenue Equestrian and then also working at a show barn. Fast forward 3 years later, three horses later, and a really great business. I've created a life that I think is really, really cool.
Okay, that's so fun. And first of all, kudos for telling your story so well. It's because I realize it's a big question. So you really broke it down for us, and I appreciate that. So what I also want people to hear is everybody has their own journey, right? So I love this question because it's so unique to every person and everyone has such a unique journey. So I love that the building blocks of what started when you were 6 years old have brought you to this point now where you're getting to do something you love, you enjoy. And while you maybe weren't passionate about those other things, they absolutely prepared you
Mhm.
for what you're doing now, right?
Absolutely. There's a lesson in everything. And I know that it's like so cheesy to say, but you don't know what it is. I was at my fashion company job doing a little bit of inventory analysis and management, right? Of, how fast are we selling through certain items? And I was like, why am I doing this? I will never need to do this again. And then years later, I was doing the same exercise for an equestrian brand, right? We needed to know what products were selling the best, what percentage of sales, how they contributed to revenue. And I didn't even know it at the time. And I was like, holy moly, this is what I was doing 5 years ago at the fashion company. And I never thought I would need this skill ever again. And here it is being really relevant. So it's super freaky sometimes how that works out. And so I appreciate everything that I go through, even if it sucks sometimes, because you never know what's valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, one of the things we're talking about today is that you are a company of one, and therefore you're really passionate about working with people who typically are a company of one. We know not every entrepreneur is not building a team, but most are starting out as a company of one. We call them solopreneurs, of course, in the business world. And you are super passionate about teaching them that even though they're a company of one, they're still a CEO. Tell me a little bit about that concept.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's this myth that when we create our own business that it's all sunshine and rainbows, right? We're in control and just because it's fun, it's easy. And I think sometimes people get a little bit too relaxed about their role in the business, and especially when they are the CEO, the CFO, and the employee and doing everything. And so I find that sometimes people skip important steps or they don't put weight where they really need to. They are the leader of the company, even if it's just for themselves. So, certain things like discipline, right? Having your working hours and setting boundaries. Something that I find a lot of people really kind of skip over is the visionary step because they get so caught up in the day to day of getting the business off the ground, making sure things are running smoothly. They lose sight of the 3, 6, 12, 18 month time frame and what they really want to do. And that also creates a little bit of a sticking point where people are not honest about their vision for the company, right? They're like, "Oh, well, it's so small. It's just me. Maybe I want to make, $50,000 this year." But when you look at companies that are doing really well, the CEO is a true visionary and is pushing the boundaries of what can happen. And they're saying in 5 years, we're going to be $100 million company, right? That doesn't mean it's going to happen tomorrow, but because they're very clear on their future vision, they can then create the pathway to making that happen. And I find that a lot of equestrian entrepreneurs are either scared to think that way, they don't know how to think that way because the dream feels too big, or they get ahead of themselves, so focused on that $100 million goal that they're also skipping important steps on the in between. So I think that's really where, I want people to see themselves as a leader, to build the confidence as a leader, and then also to build the skills as a leader. Because whether it's just for yourself, sometimes you have to lead yourself through really hard things, and it's self talk and it's saying, all right, Kelly, you have to have a really hard conversation with a client today, but you have to do it. I look around sometimes and I'm like, where's the other people? Right. And so in those moments, I need to lead myself, which is kind of a little bit of a weird example, but it's true. So that's really where, I'm super passionate about treating your role as a CEO. You, as the founder, are the most important asset to the company, whether it is just you or you're looking to build a team.
Okay. So very important. I'm kind of just soaking that in because I think you're right. It is a role that we skip over because we've all heard it. We work in and not on the business. And
Mhm.
that idea of being the visionary and setting goals and all those things, that's working on the business, right? Like planning out. And especially as a person of one. And then especially for those who are having to manage animals and manage clients and all of those things, right? And then we're saying, and you need to do this. Uh, but the reality is, if you don't, then you risk not having a sustainable business. So I'm sure we have a common passion to help people really build a business that is sustainable, that they can do for the long term. And so this is part of that process. If you want to be doing this for the long term, you have to be willing to work on your business.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where some of the discipline, right, comes into saying, okay, today, even though there's 20 things that I could do that are what I call is somewhat fake productivity, right? Like I can answer emails or I can go make a new guide, but those are things that'll keep you busy. They're pretty important, but at least once a month, I'm saying, okay, are the goals that I most recently set still applicable? Am I working towards them? Do I need to change anything? And what does that change look like? And it's not, sometimes we think it needs to be this big giant exercise and we need to do all of these inventories of our business, but it can be really that simple. Are the goals that I created still in alignment with what I want? And have they changed? And they're probably going to change a lot, especially when you're getting started. And that's where taking that pause and taking that time to say, okay, of the 20 things that are on my list today, do they pertain to the goals that I've set? And if not, how do I change it? And that is what a CEO does instead of just diving into the work. And I think sometimes we're like, okay, well, if I'm doing all the work, I'm super responsible, I'm really hardworking, I'm putting in the time to do this, but time and reps doesn't always turn into the things that actually move the needle, right? And so it's really important that we're constantly checking in, and some of the best leaders in the world are doing that often.
Yeah. Okay. You've already given us some really good practical things from the get-go, and I haven't even asked you that question. So I love that. So listeners, take note of that. We've not even really dove into the actionable practical, but she just gave you some. So having goals, having set aside a time at least once a month where you review those and ask these important questions. So Kelly, I know that you have some other ways that you're going to help us. So it's really vital. We've already established that as entrepreneurs, we look at ourselves and say, I'm a CEO, I'm going to wear that hat. And so, what are the tangible, practical ways that we can do that?
Absolutely. I could talk about this forever, which is which is why we're here today. So,
Right.
I did just, tell you, right, so setting aside the time to really think about that, and I think something that goes along with that is the permission to dream and to think big, right? And that is something that a lot of really great CEOs, a lot of great leaders are doing, and we did this exercise when I was at IBM, and it's called ideation, and it's essentially the idea that there are no bad ideas, and you never know what can be sparked out of even the craziest sorts of things. And I think the sooner that business founders and CEOs can get comfortable with the crazy and the outrageous, the more likely you are to take action, to be really creative around how to solve problems. A lot of people come to me because they're stuck, because they're just so focused on what's in front of them, and they've not flipped the problem on its head, turned it inside out, asked questions from different angles. And that is something that I love to do. I happen to be really good at it, but it's a skill that you need to build. So I think that's one of the like, give yourself permission to dream. You've already done the hard part where you made a business, right? Like it can be anything you want it to be. And so getting comfortable with that, I think is really great. And then an
Okay,
extra,
before you jump onto that,
yeah.
I have a question for you. So, on that idea of permission to dream big, when you're working with people, what do you feel like is the stuck factor,
Hmm.
right? So, I feel like a lot of these things we're talking about, and for those of you listening, if you haven't caught on, a lot of this is going to be mindset. We're going to give you practical, but if you're feeling stuck, it's probably a mindset issue. So, I would say when people don't have permission to dream big, there's probably some things that they've heard, some false beliefs that they're holding on to that are keeping them from doing that. What would you say to that person, or how would you address that?
Yeah. So people are like, "Oh, this is probably impossible," is what they say to me. And I'm like, "Nope, rewind. Everything is possible. It's just figuring out how to make it possible." But a lot of times we get stuck on what we think the goal should be, right? Oh, well, my parents want me to do this, or I spent 10 years in finance, but I really want to create a clothing company, but I'm a finance person. You don't have to be that, right? Like when you get honest with yourself and really get quiet, and this is where the mindset piece comes in. And I ask a lot of questions, and I can tell by body language, right? When I say, "What's your goal?" And they're like, "Well, I want to just do this." And I'm like, "No, tell me what you really want." And it's when people can talk about something and they get really passionate about it. And I just say, "Oh, you spent 2 minutes on finance, but you just spent 20 minutes on your ideas for a clothing company.
Mm.
Let's dive into that more. Tell me, why does that excite you? Why is that?" And sometimes it's really just holding space. And, you know, again, I hate some of these like really cliche things, but journaling, talking about it, paying attention to what you're excited about, those are all things that are really helpful. But to go back to some of like the limiting behaviors is having people around you who told you you weren't good at something. Being scared of like the financial risks of it. We always tend to want to have a safe path, right? Oh, this is a guaranteed way to make money. And that might work for the short term, but the possibilities when you put all of your time and resources into something that you love are pretty infinite. And so just questioning, like, why do I think I can't do that? Or why do I think that I might fail? And what's the worst that can happen if I fail? And that's something else that is really important to me as an entrepreneur. This is taken from Silicon Valley and the tech industry, but failing fast. The faster you experience failure, the faster you can change that. And the more comfortable you get with that, like I'm ready to fail every day. I wake up and I'm like, what can I fail at? Because it's going to get me that much closer to that. And so, asking what's the worst that can happen if I fall short of my dream or I don't make that specific dream happen. And it's usually not that bad. So giving yourself permission to like open that up and to try for things that feel a little bit different is really helpful.
Okay, so good. Thank you for diving into that because I know
Yeah.
there are people listening that are saying, okay, I thank you for giving me permission, but I still feel stuck. So I think some of those things will help them. All right, I jumped into your next one. What was your next practical tip for us?
Yeah, so this is actually something that is on my website that you can download for free. It's the planning and prioritization guide. And it's another exercise that we did from my time at IBM. So I did a lot of facilitation and workshops, and IBM, best of the best. So this is stuff that I've carried with me for 10 years now. Um, but you take your ideas, right? Every idea that you have around what you want to do in the business, whether that's making $100 million, creating a new course, signing a new client, whatever that might be, and you write down all of those ideas. I like to do it on sticky notes, but you can write it down in the workbook that I have. And then you take a look at them and you put them on a grid essentially. And on one side of the grid, I always get X and Y axis confused, but on one side is effort. And then on the bottom, the other side is impact to the business. So you're assessing, right? $100 million is going to take a lot of effort, but it's also going to have a huge impact on the business. And that becomes your long term projects, the things that you are going to work on, but you know that it's not going to happen tomorrow. Something like creating a course could be minimal effort, right? You can take all of the collateral that you've already made on social media, put it into a really nice course template, put it up on your website, and it can be done within a week. And it can have pretty significant impact to your business. So that would be something that I would call a quick win, right? That you can get that up. It's going to be impactful, minimum effort. So let's do that and take care of that while we're also working on the $100 million in revenue goal. Something like redesigning a website. I already have a website. It's a pretty good website. That's a lot of effort to redesign it. And the impact to my business is going to be pretty minimal. So that is a project that I'm actually going to take off the table for right now because the impact in the short term, especially when I compare it to my $100 million revenue goal and creating the course, that's just going to be a distraction, right? So we're actually going to pull that project off. Even though it's something that I want to do, when we're thinking about all of these things in our business, we need to be able to assess what is the most important and what is the most critical. And that is your role as a CEO, right? That is what a CEO does in bigger companies is we say, here you guys that we have all of these competing priorities. This is what is most important. And that's when you're leading yourself, right? It's super fun to make a website. There's colors, there's fonts, and you think that you're being like so productive, you're really driving the business. Most people are not going to spend that much time on your website. If you have a functional website that people can get in contact with you, they can buy your product or they can purchase your service on that website, you're good for right now. Let's go move on to some other things.
Okay, so once you've got your goals, then it's the planning and prioritization, which I would say is again another sticky point for many of us. because really we haven't stopped to say what are the priorities, right? If when I talk to, because I do coaching as well in a different, more specific to marketing. And so when we
Yeah.
talk about the priorities, people really, their priorities are set based on what everybody around them is doing
Mhm.
versus what the priorities are for your business,
Yeah.
right? So this part of sitting by yourself and thinking about where you're headed, because some people the website may be the priority because they maybe
Right.
do have a non-functioning website or one that hasn't been touched since 2000. You know,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's your personal and your business priorities that you need to get in touch with. So super
Yeah.
key.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, what else do we have?
Okay, so a couple of other things as building your leadership skills. So this is something that I find really lacking, especially in the equestrian sector of leading business, is being a leader. And one of the things that I think is so important that is so overlooked is naming and being clear about your expectations. I am the kind of person that I don't believe in testing people. I don't believe in giving them ambiguous sort of rules and guidelines, especially when you start to think about bringing on other people, whether it's a contractor or you're hiring full time. Being clear on your expectations and what success looks like is so important. I'm listening to a book from Brene Brown right now called Dare to Lead. And this is something that keeps coming up time and time again, is just being clear around what success is and how you want your team to show up. And that could be how you want yourself to show up, right? Like sometimes it's easy when we are creating our own schedule and doing things on our own time, but we have to treat it like a job and treat it like a business, right? So I know that I experience the most success when I wake up in the morning, I take a walk, I check my emails, right? I have a routine, and it's my job as a leader of myself to keep those disciplines in place. So building leadership skills is really important. Along with that is communication. And communication is tricky, right? Because we have to come up with our own personal style, right? We can consume all the information, and in order to find your personal style, there's a lot of testing. And for years, when I started my business, I would have to try on, I would call it trying on, different ways of explaining what I do. How do I explain coaching? How do I explain consulting? How do I explain the services that I deliver? And I would have to test different models. And sometimes I screwed it up really bad. I remember one of the first events that I went to, I went around and I was inviting people to have coffee with me before the event started. And I was trying to explain what I did, and I just tripped over myself so much. And I was like, who wants to come have coffee with me now? I don't even know what I do, right? But I needed that experience in order to then know what to tweak. And so people, again, they want to go into conversations being perfectly buttoned up or having everything that they want to say. There's certainly a time and a place for that, and I help people a lot with how they communicate their message and in a way that's effective and gets the result that they want. But sometimes you've got to play around and tweak it a little bit, especially when it comes to onboarding and bringing people into your team and how you communicate with them. And I think another one is just setting boundaries. And this is another one that you have to test a lot. And, I think that's one of my other sort of general concepts here is you've got to figure out what works for you by figuring out what doesn't work, right? So just constantly testing. But, what are your boundaries? And so for me, I don't take meetings on Monday mornings because as a horse person, I'm working all weekend. And, I need that time to do that. I'm able to show up better. How do I answer my clients? What time is most appropriate. Similar with the Monday morning thing, I have to be home on a Monday morning. I travel a ton, but if I am not physically in my home on a Monday morning, it's just really, really hard for me to get back on track. So that's a hard boundary. And I found that out because I was not showing up the way that I wanted to. Right. So doing all these things and really testing. And consuming, right? So as leaders, we need to consume a lot in order to figure out what these things are. So podcasts are wonderful, books are wonderful. When you're driving, traveling, doing stalls, whatever it is, putting something in your ears, I think is really, really valuable.
Yes, absolutely. Well, then I was going to ask you when it comes to boundaries, if you have a specific resource that you tend to point people to, because I know that that's a sticking point again for a lot of people is, okay, I'm hearing that I need to have boundaries, but I need these clients. I need their money. And I'm really struggling to set those boundaries because if I do that, I'm afraid they're going to leave, right? A lot of fear based thoughts here going on. But as far as resources or tips for boundaries, what might you have for those who are listening that are saying, look, I get it, but I'm a solopreneur. If I don't have these people, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I feel like those people who are saying that really, instead of running their business, their clients are running their business for them, is what often happens, right? And their life is being run by somebody else versus, being able to stand up and say, okay, this is the way I want my business to run. And a lot of that is based out of fear. So for those people, what kind of tips or advice would you give them?
Practice, honestly. And, because I was the same way, right? I was like, okay, I'll take a call at 5 o'clock in the morning, or I'll, meet somebody at 9. And I would be resentful towards the clients that were spending their time with me. This is everything I wanted. Why am I resentful? And it's because I just kind of let it leak out everywhere. And so I think that's one of the things is pay attention to where you're feeling a little bit resentful. And then it goes back to the expectation settings. So the conversation that I have with my clients very early on, and I actually did a consultation this morning, and I said, here are my non-negotiables. And if you can't work with this, like, that's totally fine. You might need to find somebody else. They need to be a partner in this. I'm not going to chase down my clients to work with me, right? They need to be active and a part of this. So I'm not going to remind you to show up to our meeting, kind of thing, right? They need to be really invested in it. I have a 24-hour email response time. It's usually sooner than that, but please don't follow up with me a million times, because 24 hours is perfectly reasonable. And if I feel like I need to constantly be in my inbox, checking and scrolling and waiting and ready to pounce on any email that I get, right? I can't show up in the best way, and I don't give the best information to my clients. And then around time, right, is just, hey, I'm spending time with my family. It's really important to me, and modeling the behavior, right? So I think too, goes back to the leadership bit, is that as a leader, like, we can model the behavior for other entrepreneurs or for the clients that we're serving, right? As a really healthy way to run a business. And it is getting yourself out of the scarcity mindset. And it's kind of like, okay, I really can't take this call at 7 o'clock on a Thursday. I'm going to tell this client that I can't, right? But it's also coming from a place of generosity and kindness, and saying, hey, 7 o'clock doesn't work for me. Here's some other times for you, right? So giving an alternative and figuring out, and that's where coming up with your own style. And also too, like, we don't owe people an explanation around our boundaries. And I think that is something that people feel like they need to over explain. I am not available at 7 because I got to get my kids from this and I got to do that and blah, blah. I'm not available at 7. And it's not really your business around why. I might be taking a nap. I don't know. Right. And so but it's one of those things that over time you need to get more comfortable with, and moving away from the scarcity mindset, right? That, like, if a client will not work with you because you're not available at a time that it does not work for you, they aren't the right client. And I know that can be really hard, right? Especially when we're starting, we need the money to keep things going. But just trusting that having those boundaries will bring you to the right people who are happy to invest, who are happy to work with you in those timeframes. And there's a lot of trust that goes into that. But trusting yourself that you can get it done, trusting that those clients exist and they are out there, and trusting that the boundaries that you set are critical to you providing your service or product to the people that you serve.
Okay, thank you. That's so, so helpful. I feel like somebody told me one time, no is a complete sentence. I wish I could remember who told me that, but that's what it reminds me of when he said, you don't have to give the reason. No is a complete sentence. Just no, it
Mhm.
doesn't work. So that's so good. So I hope that empowers some of you who are listening. These have been super, super helpful. I really appreciate they've been practical. Is there anything else, Kelly, that you're thinking? Look, for those of you who are equestrian entrepreneurs, whether you're doing products or services or a mix, what are the things they need to know about being a CEO? This is the one last thing. What would you say?
This is taken from one of my favorite resources, Amy Porterfield. And one of her mantras is do something different. And that unlocks so much. And so when you're feeling stuck, whether it's how to break through the next financial barrier or what to do with a client, flipping something on its head. And I like to think about the inverse. I'll use a quick example, is that I like to do a lot. I love having a big life, and I feel like I'm always squeezing everything in. And I kept saying to myself, oh God, I'm just trying to squeeze everything in and it's really chaotic. And I sat on that for a really long time, right? That was just what kept coming up. I was like, hold on a second. What if instead of squeezing things in, I made space, right? So the actual inverse of what I was telling myself of squeezing, what if I make space for everything that I want to do? And that is just a really good example of how can you change the language and the story that you're telling yourself about whatever you're stuck with. I can't find enough clients. I don't know where my clients live. I'm not making enough money. putting the inverse of all of that and thinking about how you can do something different will usually unlock some of the areas that you're most stuck in. And you can do that alone with yourself, right? In a journaling or a writing exercise. You can go talk to somebody else. You can come talk to me about it, right? But I think having permission to step away from what you've been trying that's not working and doing something radically different will be super impactful in your business. So that's just one of the most important things, that when people are feeling stuck, how can we do this completely differently?
Okay, so good. All right, listeners. So that's what I want you to try in your business. And I, of course, am going to link to Kelly's planning and prioritization guide in the show notes so that you guys can get that. And then, Kelly, I would love for you to tell everybody where they can find you. How can they connect with you online to learn more about what you're doing?
Absolutely. So everything you need to know is at my website, avenueequestrian.com. So you can see me, my horses, and learn a little bit more about me. You can also find me on Instagram at Avenue Equestrian. And I share a lot of resources there, as well as some fun and silly stuff. And then my inbox is always open. I do check my emails a lot, but that's it. I'm okay with that. So please feel free to email me at hello@avenueequestrian.com. And I always have a 30-minute consultation available for anybody who just wants to pick my brain or ask some questions about their business.
Okay, beautiful. And like I said, all of those things will be on the show notes too. But I know that some people just like to have their phones handy, pull it out and do it right now. So go ahead and find her on Instagram and do that follow. Kelly, thank you so much for sharing these insights. Thank you for sharing your experience. And thank you for the way that you are serving the equestrian community so well. I am so grateful.
Oh, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
All right, friends, I hope that you are walking away from today's conversation feeling encouraged and knowing that you can do this, that you can embrace this role of being a CEO, and that there are some very practical ways that you can begin to implement it in your business. So definitely go to get Kelly's free planning and prioritization guide that she shared about. If you head to the show notes at stormlily.com/145 for episode 145, I will have a link there for you to make it super easy. And then I've also got a link there for you to my free goal setting cheat sheet. It is a guide to help you get started setting goals, because oftentimes when I talk with horse business owners, they're saying, I want to connect my social media. I want to connect my daily task to the goals I have for my business. And just as Kelly talked about, having that filter. And so if you're like, I just need help setting goals in a way that's going to be connected to my daily task, then this free goal setting cheat sheet is for you. So you can head to stormlily.com/goals to get directly there, or you can head to, again, the show notes at stormlily.com/145 for episode 145. I will have links to Kelly's free guide, my free guide, and then also the highlights of this conversation, because I know that many of you are listening while you're multitasking. I do the same thing. I love podcasts and I love to be out walking or getting something done around the house or wherever it may be. And so you may not be at a place where you can take notes. And so anytime you can go to stormlily.com/145 and you'll see the highlights of the conversation, the links from today's podcast episode as well, and make it super easy for you all in one place. All right, my next thing for you. Okay, so my number one, I always want you to ask yourself, what's the one thing that I'm going to take that I heard in this podcast episode and begin applying in my business? Okay, so I want you to answer that question for yourself. And number two, get those free resources. They're a great stepping stone, a great starting step. And then number three, if this was helpful to you and you know of an equestrian business owner that needs to listen to this conversation, then will you share that with that one person? Just take the link from this episode, send it to them. Most podcast players, wherever you're listening, have a share link, and just share this one episode with them and tell them they need to listen. And then stay tuned, because I will continue to be bringing you more equestrian entrepreneurial goodness in the coming weeks and months. This is my favorite way to serve you guys. So I'm so grateful you show up here. I'm so grateful for those of you who are taking what you learn and apply it. I love to get your notes when I meet you on social media and I hear from you that the podcast has been helpful because you've been applying what you're learning. So thank you so much for joining me here. I'll continue to see you here on the podcast with new episodes. Have an amazing day.